Good morning, David, the operator?
Yes.
Okay, so it's 9:57. Have you joined the call?
Yes, I announced that you are connected.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, this meeting of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights comes to order at 10 a.m. on September 8th, 2017. The meeting takes place at the Commission's national headquarters located at 1331 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. I am Chair Catherine Lehman. Commissioners who are present in addition to me are the Vice Chair, Patricia Timmons-Goodson, Commissioner Harriet, Commissioner Kursnow, Commissioner Cladney, and Commissioner Narasaki. I believe we have on the phone Commissioners Adegbile and Commissioners Yaki. Could you confirm that you're on the phone? Commissioner Adegbile? Commissioner Yaki?
Commissioner Yaki's on the phone.
Terrific, thank you. We have a quorum of the commissioners present. I see that the court reporter is present. Is the staff director present?
Yes.
Thank you. The meeting now comes to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for this business meeting? So moved. Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Terrific. We'll look for amendments. I have a few to start us off. First, I'd like to remove the discussion and vote on report public education funding inequality in an era of increasing concentration of poverty and resegregation to allow time for edits and further review. I thank the staff for finalizing the report for our review, including very swift and thorough revisions following our first draft review, and we will place it on the agenda for our next meeting. Second, I'd like to amend to add consideration for a statement titled, "The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights denounces the pardon of former Sheriff Joe Arpaio." Are there any other amendments?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would also like to add a statement on the agenda about the Daca, entitled "The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Condemns Ending of Undocumented Youth Program."
Thank you. Any further amendments? Hearing none, let's vote to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. Turning to program planning, first we will discuss and vote on the report titled "Working for Inclusion, Time for Congress to Enact Federal Legislation to Address Workplace Discrimination Against Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Americans." We will proceed with two votes on this report, one for the report text, chapters 1 through 3, and a separate vote for the findings and recommendations contained in chapter 4. Begin with a motion to approve the text of the report, chapters 1 through 3, as amended in the version circulated by my special assistant on Friday, September 1st, subject to any editorial fixes deemed necessary by staff. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. We'll now have a discussion on the motion. I'm going to start by offering a few comments. This will be the first report from the Commission that is entirely focused on issues impacting the LGBT community. I recognize former Commissioner Roberta Achtenberg, at whose impetus the Commission took up the important issue of employment discrimination facing LGBT persons. The report text that we vote on today presents a compelling and thorough picture of pervasive discrimination faced by LGBT individuals in the workplace, not only in the private sector, but also sometimes sanctioned in federal, state, and local government levels. It presents arguments on all sides of the debate regarding the need for federal legislation to enact anti-discrimination workplace protections for the LGBT community. I thank our staff, particularly Merrick, Xavier Breuer, and Maureen Rudolph, for presenting us with this expert analysis for our consideration today. Of particular note, Merrick joined the Commission very recently, less than a year ago, and after the briefing on this topic, and has impressively culled voluminous testimony and research material in a very short period to draft and recraft this report for our consideration, and I am deeply grateful. Any other points for discussion on this report? Commissioner Asaki?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also would like to acknowledge the great work of staff. I'm very proud of the report, and it's particularly timely given the debate that is currently going on in this country about these rights, and so I hope that the staff feel very proud of their work.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Yaki?
Thank you very much. I also want to commend the staff and also the work of my special assistant, Alan Duell, at the time that he was working for Commissioner Achtenberg. This is amazing to me when I think about how far this country has come and this commission has come in the first 60 years, that this is the actually first real report on the impact of discrimination and civil rights laws on the LGBTQ community. And it's especially proud for me, being from San Francisco, one of the birthplaces of LGBTQ protections, where this commission has taken up this report. And it's due in no small part to the hard work and the leadership of people in the community, especially former Commissioner Achtenberg. So I just want to add my thanks to the staff and to Alec and to Roberta for her leadership on this, and commend this report and look forward to its passage.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question and take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbre, are you present? No.
Present.
Oh, and how do you vote? Terrific. Commissioner Harriet? I'm going to abstain on this one. Okay. Commissioner Kirsnow?
Abstain.
Commissioner Cladley?
Yes.
Commissioner Asaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons-Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 2 commissioners abstained. All others were in favor. Now we'll discuss and vote on Chapter 4 of the report, the findings and recommendations. I move these as a package unless any commissioner wishes us to vote them individually. I begin with a motion to approve the text of Chapter 4, the findings and recommendations as amended in the version circulated by my special assistant on Friday, September 1, subject to any editorial fixes deemed necessary by staff. Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call the question and take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degberry, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Harriet?
I'm a no on this one.
Commissioner Kursanow?
No.
Commissioner Gladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Arasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Raki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 2 commissioners opposed, all others were in favor. We'll now consider the amended business items, beginning with the statement on the pardon of Joe Arpaio. I'll first read the statement so we know what it is that we are voting on, and I note that my special assistant circulated some changes very shortly before the meeting. The statement is titled, "The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights denounces the pardon of former Sheriff Joe Arpaio." The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights denounces President Donald J. Trump's pardon of former Sheriff Joe Arpaio. The pardon of Mr. Arpaio, who repeatedly violated the civil rights of Latino residents of Maricopa County, Arizona, and also violated a federal court order to desist from violating those civil rights, flouts the rule of law. Moreover, because these violations occurred while Mr. Arpaio was acting as a law enforcement officer, the pardon erodes the promise of fair administration of justice. Pardoning a person convicted of deliberately and flagrantly defying a federal court order over a sustained period of time undermines the rule of law in this country by signaling that supporters and allies of the president who violate civil rights and ignore orders from federal courts will not be held accountable, as our system of justice requires. The many court decisions filed over the course of nearly a decade of litigation against Mr. Arpaio and the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office established a disturbing course of intentional violations of civil rights. In 2007, litigants filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all Latino persons who had or would be detained in Maricopa County, Arizona, claiming that Mr. Arpaio and his office had illegally and without authorization engaged in discriminatory behavior against Latino individuals in Maricopa County. Despite a federal court ordering Mr. Arpaio and his office to stop their unlawful behavior, court records show that he made repeated public statements that he understood he was violating the court's order, including that he would, quote, never give in to control by the federal government. Even if the Supreme Court struck down an Arizona immigration law, he declared, quote, I'm still going to do what I'm doing. The underlying reasons for Mr. Arpaio's criminal conviction are alarming. Latino residents of Maricopa County sought justice for the violation of their civil rights, only to be confronted with Mr. Arpaio's public and blatant contempt for the law after a court vindicated their claims. The pardon functionally endorses racial profiling and abuses of authority, contrary to the work of hundreds of thousands of hardworking law enforcement officers around the country who faithfully uphold the law. Chair Catherine Lehman said, quote, the president's pardon of Sheriff Arpaio damages the fabric of our nation by condoning from law enforcement deliberate, flagrant violation of a court order, specifically to protect fundamental constitutional principles. The federal courts fulfilled their obligation to protect and uphold civil rights, and it is anathema to the fair administration of justice for the president to dismiss that judgment. And now move to approve the statement to open the floor for discussion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the statement?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Yaki?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the leadership of you and others on this commission for putting this statement together. I don't really have much to add to this other than to say that to me this is the moral equivalent of pardoning someone like Bull Connor in terms of the impact this person has had on a minority community in their jurisdiction. It is unconscionable, and I think that if I could, I would condemn the president even more so than what we have done today, because this is nothing less than to me, a conspiracy to cover up civil rights violations and aid and abet civil rights violations in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair?
Madam Chair, I intend to vote for this statement. I think there's a compelling reason for us to issue it. We've laid out very clearly and succinctly why we're issuing the statement. One thing that we don't mention and that weighs heavily on me to support this is that I've not seen one single word from the sheriff indicating that he is in the least bit remorseful. And normally when pardons are issued, that is a consideration. And let us get this statement out.
Thank you. Commissioner Arasaki?
Yes, I'm particularly struck by the fact that we have two judges who have reviewed his actions. Judge Snow, who declared that the facts of the case were particularly egregious and extraordinary, that the Sheriff's Office constitutional violations are broad in scope, involve its highest-ranking command staff, and flow into its management of internal affairs investigations, that they had engaged in multiple acts of misconduct, dishonesty, and bad faith, that they had demonstrated a persistent disregard for the orders of the court, as well as an intention to violate the laws and policies. And then the criminal judge who looked at the case for criminal contempt also held that the evidence showed a flagrant disregard for Judge Snow's order despite the knowledge of the order, that the sheriff had broadcast to the world and his subordinates that he would and that they should continue what he had always been doing. And I feel very strongly about issuing this statement.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. Call the question for a roll call vote. Commissioner Degboy, how do you vote? Commissioner Harriet?
I too am very, very troubled by the sheriff's behavior. I also agree with the vice chair that remorse is ordinarily a consideration, but I'm going to have to abstain on this one. I feel that, like, if I had an earlier opportunity to negotiate how this is worded, I might have been able to come up with something, but I would have to abstain.
Okay. Commissioner Kursnow?
I agree with the pardon, but I abstain.
Commissioner Cladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Arasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons-Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 2 commissioners abstained. All others were in favor. We'll now consider the statement on the Daca program. Turn it over to Commissioner Arasaki to read the statement so we know what we are voting on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The statement reads, the title is U.S. Commission on Civil Rights denounces, need to move on. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights condemns ending of undocumented youth program. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights disapproves of President Donald J. Trump's decision to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, otherwise known as DACA, program. The decision is a step backward for our country, which draws its strength from the valuable social and economic contributions from all members of society. The DACA program provided temporary relief from deportation and work permits to many young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers, who were brought to the U.S. as children and are considered Americans in every way except on paper. Over 800,000 Dreamers have benefited from the DACA program, which has allowed them to attend college, start businesses, and serve and protect our country. Repealing the program would have a significant economic impact on the nation. Approximately 700,000 jobs would be removed from the economy, as well as hundreds of billions of dollars in lost tax revenue and economic growth over the next decade. If the administration pursues deportation of these immigrants, the cost could run into billions of dollars. The decision is a tremendous blow to the personal dreams and ambitions that Dreamers have been working toward since the Daca program began in 2012. They now face a reality where they are at risk of being exploited in the workplace and deported and prevented from fully contributing to and supporting their families, their community, and their country. For decades, the Commission and its state advisory committees have investigated and reported on the often negative civil rights implications of our nation's immigration laws and policies. In addition, ending the program after participants have relied now to their serious detriment on its promises raises serious access to justice concerns. Although the administration has stated, absent a law enforcement interest, the Department of Homeland Security will generally not take actions to remove active DACA recipients. DACA recipients may still have their status revoked, and after their status expires, can be subject to deportation. Undocumented people were encouraged to come forward under DACA and are now vulnerable because they took action to protect themselves and their families. The Commission strongly urges Congress to pass legislation to protect DACA beneficiaries and to work on a compassionate and comprehensive modernization of our immigration system. Chair Catherine E. Lehman stated, "Bending America's social fabric to target children solely on the basis of their parents' decision offends the American values embodied in the Dreamers and their principled contributions to our nation."
Thank you. We'll now discuss the statement. Is there a motion so we can open the floor for discussion?
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion on the statement?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'm going to vote against this one as opposed to abstaining. There are several reasons for doing so. I take seriously the previous statement with respect to Sheriff Arpaio and the mention made of his failure to abide by the rule of law, and that there are a number of people who faithfully execute the law, and that his misconduct related to that argues against the issuance of a pardon. In the same vein, this DACA order was unconstitutional, and beyond that, violated, even if it was arguably constitutional, it violated the Administrative Procedure Act. So if we're going to be consistent, and we should be, about our respect for the rule of law, then with respect to this particular DACA statement, we should oppose the implementation of DACA. Here, DACA is not being repealed. There's a 6-month lead time so that Congress should weigh in on it. That's what should have been done in the first instance. But beyond that, there are factual errors contained in the statement, even if everything else didn't pertain. And that is, we say here that this affects 800,000 Dreamers, and that somehow this would cause the loss of 700,000 jobs. Now, only two things could be plausible here on its face. One is that Dreamers have a labor force participation rate that is 88%, whereas the typical labor force participation rate for most Americans is 62%. I doubt that it's 88%. The only other way of looking at it is the 800,000 Dreamers create another 250,000 jobs to support them. If that were the case, if that were extrapolated to the rest of the United States population, that would cause a creation of 25 to 40 million new jobs just to support the people who are currently in the workforce. That's implausible. But then again, I've only been practicing labor and employment law for 38 years and probably don't have the insights that the boys and girls who wrote this on behalf of some advocacy organizations who came up with these studies did. In addition to that, there's flaws with respect to the data related to the cost of this. I am very pleased that we're concerned about the fiscal consequences of the repeal or potential repeal of DACA, or maybe even deportation. But some of the absurdities relate to, and there's copious reporting on this, but more importantly, we have government stats that show this, but we went to advocacy organizations to look at their stats with respect to the fiscal impact of this. If you look at government stats, it's true that those with advanced degrees probably are a net contributor of $420,000 to the economy over and above what they take out of the economy over their lifetimes. However, For those who don't have advanced degrees, among illegal immigrants, the net drain is $173,000 over their lifetime. And if you put those both together, we're looking at $63,000 per illegal immigrant net drain on the economy. That doesn't influence my opinion, but since we're talking about the fiscal impact of this, I should at least hope that we would be accurate about that. So at bare minimum, for those three reasons, but principally because Daca was flawed from its inception because it was unconstitutional, and if you argue that's not unconstitutional despite the Fifth Circuit ruling on DAPA, then it at least does not satisfy the prerequisites of Section 5 of the Administrative Procedure Act.
Commissioner Arasaki?
Yes, a couple of things. I dispute the comparison of this to Sheriff Arpaio, who not only swore to uphold the Constitution, but who knowingly was violating several judicial court orders. I find that particularly heinous given the important role that federal courts have played in protecting the civil rights of minorities. And in this case, that was the role they're trying to play today. And in pardoning him, that undermined that very important principle of what the court's role is. I also dispute that it is that what President Obama's executive order did was unconstitutional. I agree, actually, that Congress needs to act swiftly. The reality is that the president had to act because Congress has been unable for well over a decade now to address a long broken immigration system that does not serve our economic needs or our humanitarian values as a nation. So I think that it's very important in this case where you have young people who were asked by the federal government to come forward in order to have more transparency, to protect our security as a nation, to then turn on them and say, we were just kidding, and we're now going to use that against you, I think hurts the nation's credibility in the long term when the federal government ever tries to make promises, again, to fix problems. People are not going to trust the federal government, and I think that undermines our democracy very strongly. So that's why I think it's very important to act now, and this is not just a position held by advocates. It is a position held by many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, many corporations, and many other moral leaders.
Madam Chair, I do think that if someone who is in a position of authority and is sworn to uphold the rule of law knowingly violates it should be held to account, and it's particularly egregious if they do. On at least 12 separate occasions, President Obama, the chief law enforcement officer in the country, knowingly stated that he didn't have the authority to do what Daca did. He said it on numerous occasions. It's recorded. It's on television. It's in transcripts, in a number of occasions over the years. Yet he went ahead and did it. It is not the function of the President of the United States to usurp the role of Congress simply because Congress doesn't take action on something. That's not the way our system works. Nonetheless, he took action on it. Moreover, it is unlawful. Judge Hayman held it unlawful, not with respect to Daca, but its correlative, DAPA, and it's abundantly clear. I mean, this is almost inarguable, and I know we'll be arguing it because of the political imperatives related to it, but this was a categorical amnesty. It was not selective prosecutorial discretion, but moreover, it conferred positive benefits. It wasn't simply a declaration of amnesty or an amnesty related to certain individuals that might arguably constitute prosecutorial discretion. What we have here is a conferring of positive benefits, not just declining to prosecute, but going above and beyond by giving positive benefits and actual action that is only the province of Congress to do. So with respect to the rule of law, if we're going to be saying that Judge Arpaio, and I think appropriately so, violated or knowingly violated the rule of law, DACA is a knowing violation of the rule of law, DACA is not being summarily repealed, it's being given to Congress appropriately to tackle this issue sometime in the next 6 months.
Commissioner Asaki?
We could debate this for a long time, and as you correctly point out, the judge ruled on Daca, which had to do with the parents, which is one step removed from this case, and I think distinguishable. I don't think there's any point in us, because we're clearly not going to convince each other on that point. I would note that President Obama was actually referring to his inability to comprehensively address immigration reform for all undocumented immigrants through executive action, something that advocates, in fact, were trying to press him to do, but he did not. But he did spend a lot of time, and a lot of attorneys spent a lot of time looking at the question of whether it fell within the prosecutorial discretion to be able to reallocate resources. It was not an amnesty. They were not given permanent path to citizenship. They were only allowed to stay, and they had to keep renewing themselves and proving themselves worthy. There are many limitations on it. So I think to call it a blanket amnesty is a little bit of an overstatement. Thank you.
I want to add to that the current president of the United States has made clear his own view that the president does have executive authority to act, tweeting on September 5th. Congress now has 6 months to legalize Daca, something the Obama administration was unable to do. If they can't, I will revisit this issue. We'll wait to see if there's any further discussion. Hearing none, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Dagboy, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Harriet?
No.
Commissioner Kirsnow?
No.
Commissioner Gladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 2 commissioners opposed. All other commissioners were in favor. Next, we'll turn to our state advisory committees. Today's agenda gives us 3 state advisory committee appointment slates to consider. Before we begin discussion, I remind all that objections to these slates have already been shared with all the commissioners. To the extent anyone would like to discuss continuing objections, I ask that you not mention specific candidates by name. Each of these individuals has agreed to volunteer time and energy in the pursuit of the protection of civil rights. With that, I will begin with the New Jersey Advisory Committee. I move that the Commission appoint the following individuals to the New Jersey Advisory Committee based on the recommendation of the Staff Director: Lawrence Lustberg, Sahara Aziz, Marcia Brown, Laura Fong, Brian Gaffney, Manuel Garcia, Erica Jedinak, Donita Judge, Pearl Park, Joan Rivets, Salo Santiago, Daniel Schubert, Amal Sinha, John Stanley Jr., William Stepney, Christian Stout, Frank Tenari, and Carol Tonks. With this motion, the Commission will also appoint Lawrence Lustberg as Chair of the New Jersey State Advisory Committee. All of these members will serve as uncompensated government employees. If the motion passes, the Commission will authorize the Staff Director to execute the appropriate paperwork for the appointments. Do I have a second for the motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Commissioner Asaki?
I just would like to acknowledge the staff for doing such a great job for all the slates and recruiting younger people from the communities that they serve so that they could participate with their perspective. So I just want to acknowledge it because it was something that I had been asking for, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degboy, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Harriet?
I vote yes.
Commissioner Kirsnow?
No.
Commissioner Gladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 1 commissioner opposed. All others were in favor. I now move that the Commission appoints the following individuals to the North Dakota Advisory Committee based on the recommendations of the Staff Director: Eric Asa, Cesaria Alvarez, Scott Berlier, David Chapman, Yihan Chu, Kirsten Delphinius, Crystal Duker, Stephanie Johnson, Cheryl Carey, Lisa Lowenfeit, Michelle Ridds, and Cheryl Stradinger. With this motion, the Commission will also appoint Eric Asa as Chair of the North Dakota Advisory Committee.
All of these members will serve as uncompensated government employees. If the motion passes, the commission will authorize the staff director to execute the appropriate paperwork for the appointments. Do I have a second for this motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question and take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Kursnow?
Yes.
Commissioner Harriet?
Yes.
Commissioner Cladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narsaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Rocky?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes unanimously. I now move that the commission appoint the following individuals to the Rhode Island Advisory Committee based on the recommendations of the staff director. Alero Akpoye, Donald Anderson, Fareed Ansari, Charles Berkeley Jr., Marcellus Betancourt, Langdon Clow, Ernest Greco, Margot Morisseau, Adelita Orefice, Gary Sasse, Alina Schiff, Jennifer Steinfeld, Andrew Tugan, and William Ray. With this motion, the commission will also appoint Jennifer Steinfeld as chair of the Rhode Island Advisory Committee. All of these members will serve as uncompensated government employees. If the motion passes, the commission will authorize the staff director to execute the appropriate paperwork for the appointments. Do I have a second for this motion?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Kursnow?
No.
Commissioner Harriet?
Yes.
Commissioner Cladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narsaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Rocky?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. One commissioner opposed, all others were in favor. I note that after passing these three slates, we now have all 51 of our advisory committees appointed and doing their part to be the commission's eyes and ears around the country. I am so very grateful to our regional program staff for their hard work to identify persons to nominate for these advisory committees, as well as to support the advisory committee's work itself. The state advisory committees provide crucial civil rights functions, identifying concerns in their states and recommending reforms, and I am thrilled that we now have the full slate of these committees appointed. I have had the pleasure to witness the work of our regional staff as they have moved us to this place, and I am deeply, deeply grateful. Turn it over to the Commission's Supervisory Chief of our Regional Programs Unit, David Musart, for a few words on that topic.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Madam Vice Chair, and Commissioners. Well, thank you for providing me that moment to recognize staff who work not only appoint, but to fulfill the mission of these 51 advisory committees that are now appointed. Our designated officers, David Barreras, Ivy Davis, Barbara DeLaviz, Anna Victoria Fortes, Jeff Hinton, and Melissa Winterowski. We also have 4 support staff who have been instrumental in working together as a team to support our committees across the nation. Carolyn Allen, Evelyn Ballhart, Lynn Sanders, and Angelica Trevino. We all have been further aided by the technological improvements provided to us by Pam and Michelle, so I want to thank them for the help. It's important to recognize the work of our maiden interns who did several jobs searching for and identifying potential candidates. In particular, Sarah Gibson, Delaney Early, and Brianna Davidson. In addition, of the work of Alvin Saline, Cheryl Colgard, and Maureen Rudolph, we drafted a more efficient and effective administrative instruction at the direction of Staff Director Miles. It is unlikely these committees will all be appointed. Through this new process, we have been able to constructively work through the inevitable challenges that arise. We also have been able to work closely with all special assistants who have been incredibly helpful in identifying potential candidates. I personally want to thank them for the help and professional support. It's really been a team effort, and it has been rewarding and beneficial to work with all the special assistants as part of that team. Finally, thank you to the commissioners who, after all, do the actual appointing of the members to our committees, and to Staff Director Morales, who set the clear goal of getting all the committees appointed. I realize it is impossible to fully satisfy all commissioners with every committee, but please know any deficiencies were not out of lack of effort by the staff. Thank you again for providing me with this opportunity.
Thank you, David. Next, we'll hear from Staff Director Mara Morales for the monthly Staff Director's Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As always, I won't go into the details of the report. We have an additional section we need to add to the report. from General Counsel's office, I believe. If we haven't already received it, I will make sure to circulate it to everybody. It's just been a very busy month, and we had a short turnaround from the last business meeting. In addition, Madam Chair, you had asked me to come back with commissioners with a plan on the status of OCRE's ability to accomplish their mission in the future, but because of staffing challenges over the last 2 weeks and a personal matter that developed for me, I've not been able to address that plan, create that plan for you, but I will do so forthwith, and I apologize, but I'll address that this week and get back to you in an email or in an email to all commissioners on what that plan, what my recommendations should be for that plan. In addition, I'll also be coming back to commissioners with additional information on the planning for the 60th anniversary event. We've been working on it. We've been working on a few details. We have a few more left to iron out, and I'll also be coming back to commissioners in an email on the status of what that looks like at this point. And lastly, I circulated at the last moment yesterday a statement on the anniversary of the 60th, of the signing of the 1957 Civil Rights Act, and which created the 60th, which created the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. And so I know it was out of order, but I thought it might be worthwhile to consider. And unless there's any strong opposition to it, I was thinking that perhaps I could issue it, if not today, then perhaps on Monday, but I will defer to the collective wisdom of the commissioners as to the timing on that, and with that, I have nothing more to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate letting us know where you are in responding to my request. Do you have a timeline for when you will get back to us?
Within the next week.
Thank you. We can now recess until 11 a.m. when we will begin our historical presentation, to which I very much look forward. Thanks.
Is it really different?
Well, I voted for the Rhode Island South because Charles Lockley is in it. That's